what affects the growth of tape grass is salinity in the river. So when people dredge the river deeper, for example, we get a lot more salt water pushing up further upstream. And if that occurs for a long enough time period, the grasses die back. And so their food source is impacted and is reduced. And so that affects manatees, obviously, and their distribution.
Wow. Well, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about manatees, and we're actually going to take a break and come back and continue this discussion and talk more about manatees, their habitat. I've got some questions for you about this issue with, cold stress and where do they go when they're trying to seek refuge, and some of the future outlook that you see for manatees and what I think there's some hopeful things down the road. You mentioned that the manatee populations are increasing, and that's a good thing. And let's talk about some solutions for protecting the manatees long term when we come back. We'll be back in just a minute with Dr. Jerry Pinto from JEU talking about manatees and some of his research involving these wonderful creatures.
In today's fast-paced world, sometimes it's easy for all of us to forget our responsibilities in society. Vital resources we use every day can start to seem like a commodity. Resources like water. Many of us see the St. Johns River flowing every day. Plenty of water, right? How often do you see things like this? It just doesn't seem important in the grand scheme of things. I mean, we waste water all the time and the world keeps on spinning. Think about this though. What if we didn't have the water to waste? What if we ran out of water? You would regret not saving it then, wouldn't you? Before you waste another drop, remember, what if someday you weren't able to?
Hi, welcome back for the second half of the St. Johns Riverkeeper Show. I am here today with Dr. Jerry Pinto. Dr. Pinto is a research scientist from Jacksonville University's Marine Science Research Institute, or MSRI as we like to call it. And we are here talking about manatees and Jerry's research on manatees and how that is used by policymakers to make decisions to help protect these incredible species. Can you tell me a little bit more about, when we left off, we were actually talking about some of the threats, and we were talking about habitat, and you had mentioned that there was a variety of different things that cause harm to the submerged aquatic vegetation that they rely so heavily on for a food source. And you had said that there were some other things that also affect
well, yeah, one of the biggest things, of course, is droughts. And in the last few years, we've had reduced rainfall and freshwater input into our estuary, into our river system, and so that takes a toll because that also makes the salinity increase. And salinity is, of course, the amount of salt in the water. So as the salinity increases and stays elevated for longer than normal periods of time, grass beds die back, and so that affects the food source for manatees.
Well, and that's one of the things that, Jerry, we've talked about on this show numerous times when St. Johns Riverkeeper is concerned about plans, for instance, to remove water from the St. Johns to use for irrigation and drinking water. There's a lot of plans that we've talked about in Central Florida to use the St. Johns as a source of water for their shrinking water supply, or actually for the growing population, I should say. And then also dredging, as you mentioned before, when we dredge the river and make it deeper, that means salt water pushes farther up into the St. Johns. And so we have to be very mindful, I think, when we make these decisions about the impacts, especially when we consider the things that are out of our control, like you mentioned, the droughts. And there's some evidence that with climate change that there's going to be potentially longer droughts or back-to-back drought events that could have a big impact, especially when you look at the impacts that we have as humans on the river. We don't want to exacerbate that problem and then obviously affect a major food source of the manatees. And it's not just a major food source of the manatees, the submerged aquatic vegetation, but it's really a food source and a breeding ground for a lot of other types of organisms.
Yeah, it's a shelter for almost all the larval stages of all our commercial fisheries. Crab fisheries, shrimp fisheries, finfish, many of their larval stages take place in estuaries. Grass beds form this area of shelter where they are away from predators, where they can actually go through those initial growth periods to be recruited back into the stock, where to supply our fish needs,
Now,
fish food needs.
Yeah, and one of the things I know, Jerry, that you work on is every year, JU, UNF, and Valdosta State collaborate to produce what is called, and we're going to put that up on the screen here in just a second, called the State of the River Report for the Lower St. Johns River. And now this is for the section of the river, if you're not familiar with the lower section. What we're talking about is the section just south of Palatka to the mouth of the river at Mayport in the Atlantic Ocean. And you are one of the research scientists that work on that project. Will you tell us a little bit about that? And we've got up on the screen a brochure that's produced as part of that report.
Yeah, well, this report is really an interesting report because it has a wealth of information that many people can use. The public can use it. If you're interested in what's happening in your neck of the woods, your backyard, you can go to this report and pretty much find out. It has a number of different sections. One deals with water quality, another deals with fisheries. For those of you who are interested in fishing, this would be an incredibly important section. Aquatic life, and contamination, pollutants and that kind of thing. So what happens is there are a number of indicators or species that are looked at in these different sections, these 4 different sections, and there's a thumb up to show you, or a thumb down to show you how the status of these various indicators are, and there's also arrows that show you whether the trend is increasing or decreasing or is stable, depending on whatever that means. And there's a little blurb that tells you what that means. So, for example, with SAVs, submerged aquatic vegetation, my section in this report is to do with endangered species and submerged aquatic vegetation. So, if you look at SAVs, for example, you'll see a red hands down and an arrow showing a downward trend. And so what that would indicate is that the future of SAVs at the moment is not good because they are decreasing. One of the next questions you might ask is, well, why? Why is that happening? Well, we have seen a number of droughts recently that have impacted that, and that's probably mostly the reason why SAVs are decreasing. But over the years also there's been considerable human impact in the sense that dredging has occurred in the river and the channel has been dug deeper. And so that means more salt water is pushed further upstream and has moved where you get the fresh and the salt water meeting. You have a wedge that has drifted slightly more upstream as a result of that. And that affects, of course, all the living things in that estuary.
And I know that one of the ways that you do determine the status of the SAVs and the status of the manatee is you fly the river. Is it every 2 weeks, I believe? Or?
Well, during the winter we don't have many manatees here, so we fly once a month. But starting actually this month, well, not this month, April, next month, we'll start flying every 2 weeks. And so we've been doing this fairly consistently for the last 15 years. So we have one of the best, or the best, data set on manatees in the state. So that's why state and federal agencies use our data. They believe we do it correctly and that we collect good data and it's usable. So that's one of the reasons.
And so what you observed and through those flights is that the SAVs have disappeared or are diminished in certain parts of the river.
Certainly in north of the Buckman Bridge, for example, we used to have SAVs. If you go back to the 1700s, the Bartrams, they used to extend all the way to downtown. So they've moved back since then. Recently, SAVs north of the Buckman Bridge have moved further south or disappeared just north of the Buckman Bridge. So a lot of this data, I must say, comes from the Water Management District. They have hundreds of stations out there that they do transect surveys on, and they determine, they measure things like the bed length out from the shore, and how patchy it is, and how tall the blades are, and how robust they are, and the health of the grass beds. They have these indicators that they measure that are covered in this report, that have shown this trend too, a declining trend at most sites.
Well, and one of the things, Jerry, I would encourage everyone to do is, we don't have time, obviously, to get into all of the different parameters, but I would love for folks to go out there and learn more about the report and some of the important information in here. And the good thing is, if you're a science nut and you really want to dig into and get into the meat of this report, there's long reports about each section, as you mentioned, water quality and habitat. But there's also, as we put up on the screen, a really easy to read brochure that you mentioned that has the thumbs up or thumbs down to let you know what the status is, and then the trend, whether we're doing better or worse, or it's status quo and staying the same. And that gives us, I think the importance of this for us is that we really need to understand and have a good understanding of how we're doing, what is the state of the river. And so many, we get that, I get that question so frequently.
And I'd like to mention one other thing that's really important, and that is that if anybody has a question, there are contacts of the various researchers in this report. You can email them. You can ask them, I don't understand this, what do you mean, or what's going on here? And they'd be happy to send you an email and explain what's going on.
Well, in one way you can access this, unfortunately we can't put this up on the screen today, but it's real simple, the website. Just go to sjrreport.com, so as in St. John's River report.com, sjrreport.com, and you can access both the full report but also the brochure that summarizes some of the findings from the report, and I'd encourage folks to do that. We're running out of time here, Jerry. I want to get a final thought from you on what do you see as the outlook for manatees? I know that you said that there's some increases in the numbers. What do you see for the long-term output? I mean, you think we're doing an adequate job protecting them? Are we getting better? Are people more conscious?
Yeah, I think that if we look at the track record of 20 years ago compared to today, we've come a long way. We've done a lot of good things, a lot of good strides. Manatees' survival has been increased. They're doing much better. Their population is growing. The only problem I see is that we need to keep doing what we're doing, because if we roll back anything, then that could potentially, start nailing coffins and nails in the coffin of the manatee, because it's a very delicate species. You can see that with one red tide event, for example, at that time the known population was around 2,000 animals or 3,000 animals in Florida. Almost 10% were, or a good number were knocked out in that event. So we need to keep doing what we're doing and protecting them.
Yeah, do you see boaters and people that use the river are more aware, and you may not have data to prove it, but do you get a sense that people are trying to be more cautious as they boat?
Yeah, certainly one of the components of the Manatee Protection Plan is an educational component. So we're happy to go out and talk to schools and educate people and civic groups and church groups and whoever listen to us about manatees. So education has been tantamount.
Right.
We also talk to the marine construction industry in the port, and get the word out that way. So the education has played an important part.
That's great. Well, and I encourage all of you out there to get more educated about the river, about this report, and about manatees. You can go to our website, learn more. The bottom line is get involved. It's your river, it's our river. We've got to take responsibility for it, so I encourage you to get involved in protecting the St. John's. Thank you. We're a non-profit advocacy group at St. John's River.
And our mission is to help protect the river.